Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for this morning's session. Today, we're looking at part one of running the VAT return. Part two will be on Thursday of this week. So part one is all about looking at the first two tabs of the VAT return wizard. And then part two, which we cover on Thursday, we're looking at the processes on the third tab of the VAT return. So actually making your submission, doing your VAT transfer, and obviously making your payment as well. That's what's covered in part two. Today, we're looking at generating your VAT return all the way up to the point where you can actually reconcile it. So hopefully we'll get done within the 45 minutes that we've allocated for this morning, and maybe a little bit quicker. Depends how many questions we get along the way. Now, we'll just quickly cover a little bit of housekeeping just before we get started. So as usual, you don't need a microphone for these sessions. If you do have one, and you've enabled it, you'll find it's muted automatically. You can't unmute yourself during the session. So any questions that you may have for us today, you'll need to pop them into the questions panel. You just click the little speech bubble icon, it'll expand the panel, and you'll have access to that box in the bottom right-hand corner where you can start typing any comments or questions you have. Remember to click send. We've got Laura on hand today to help answer those questions, so you may get a straightforward answer, maybe a link to a help article, which has a lot more detailed information on there. Or if it's a bit more in depth, it may be a case we recommend that you contact our support team, or even HMRC or the revenue, depending where you're based. If anyone wants a copy of today's slides, they are available to download via the handout option. So do take that opportunity during the session. And as usual, this session is being recorded. So if you need a bit of a recap or you miss any of it, maybe you work in a busy office, you just need a bit of a recap, just remember the recording's there. You might be at the beginning of your quarter. You actually think, well, actually, I'll have a bit of a recap when I'm next ready to run the VAT return. So keep the follow-up email handy. It's going to include the link to today's recording. On that follow-up email, which you receive round about an hour after you finish, it will also include a link so you can register for our upcoming webinars, including Thursday's VAT Return Part 2, if you haven't already registered for that one, and also a link to our recordings page as well. So you can access our recordings at any time. Now, quite a short agenda looks quite a short agenda, but quite a bit to get through this morning. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction. We'll then really just get stuck into some demonstrations running through that VAT return. So trying to familiarise you with the steps that are available. Now, I'm well aware that obviously there are differences between a UK and a Republic of Ireland VAT return. I am going to try and cater for both. I'll be using a UK VAT return for the purpose of the demo, but the process itself is pretty much the same. Now, I've got some screenshots that I'll show you so you can see the two VAT returns side by side. So there's not a lot of difference. Yes, the VAT return itself, different boxes, the way it calculates, a bit different as well. But I'll try and point those out along as we run through that demonstration. Just at the end, we'll explain more about the additional support, and obviously, if there's any outstanding questions, we'll try and pick those up, but do keep them coming. We'll try our best to answer as many of those as we can on the session today. Now, just before we get stuck into the webinar itself, I'm going to pop a poll on your screen. So let me just quickly select that, and I'll pop that on your screen. So if you don't mind, if you could get involved, just let me quick question for you. Which return do you generate? Is it a UK return? Is it a return for the Republic of Ireland, or do you do both? So if you don't mind, choose an answer, get it submitted, and it just gives me a little bit of background to who we've got here today. I'll just wait till I get a really good percentage of voting for that one, and then we can, I'll share the results with you as well so you can see what people have gone for. Right, okay. So we've got about 80% of you having voted there. So I'll quickly share the results with you just so you can see what people have gone for. So 80% of you are doing a UK VAT return. 80% do an Irish VAT return, and 2% of you potentially do both. As I say, we will be using a UK VAT return for the purpose of the demo, but I've got some screenshots as well, so you can see the differences when we run through that. So we're going to get stuck into some demonstrations, so you can see what options are available, what it actually looks like, and try and familiarise you with that process. Now, as far as selecting the VAT return, I'll start with my first slide just before we get stuck into the VAT return. So it doesn't matter whether you're UK based or you're based in Ireland. The way that you access the VAT return is essentially the same. Yes, you've got some different options, but you'll go into the VAT ledger and then you'll have a VAT return option on your toolbar at the top. So the way that you access it, pretty much the same, no difference. Now, when you get into it, it will launch the wizard. As you see, other than the VAT return looking a bit different for Ireland, pretty much the same layout, same options. So you've got 3 tabs along the top. And the idea with the VAT return, this has been around for quite some time, this VAT return wizard. Few tweaks here and there over the years, but generally it's stayed pretty much the same. The idea is it breaks it down into manageable steps. So on each of the tabs along the top, there's a number of tasks. So you can see on one, you've got the option to back up, specify your date range, there's a VAT verification, and then there's the calculate VAT return. So it's just a case of working through those steps. So that's where we're going to start. So let's pop across to my PC. You see my desktop at that point. So I'll pop into the VAT ledger. Now it's a bit of an older set of data that I'm using today. So I'm going to actually be running a VAT return for January 24 to March 24. So it's just an old set of data. And you'll see obviously as we run through that process, you'll see the various steps involved. Any previous VAT returns you will find they're obviously listed. You can actually view an old VAT return just by double click it, view your figures, print them out, drill down, etc. So you've got those. Obviously when you reconcile your return, it creates this archive and adds it to the list. Now the only reason really they wouldn't be there is at some point they've been deleted. So someone's gone in, highlighted one, and then you've got the delete option at the top. Now if you find when you click VAT return, it's actually taking you into a VAT return, it probably just means that you've got one highlighted. So just click clear, make sure you've got nothing highlighted, and then click into your VAT return option, and it launches your VAT return wizard. So we're on step 1. So today, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're covering step 1 and step 2. So we're going as far as actually agreeing the figures and reconciling it to generate that VAT return. And it's step 3 that we're going to be covering on Thursday. So first task, take it back up. Now it's something that you should be doing regularly anyway, but you can't manually undo a VAT return. So if you were to just go through it and maybe check your figures and think, I just want an idea of what that looks like. So what we would term out running a dummy VAT return. So you may be putting in your VAT return period and you calculate it just to see your current state of play. If you accidentally reconcile that and you flag your transactions, you can't manually undo that. The only way you can undo that is by restoring. So I would always say when you come into this screen, even if it's just to run a dummy return and you've got to cancel out, take that back up just in case, cover your back. So nice and easy to obviously take your backup. Now I only need to cover data files at this point. I don't need to include any other files. You may find that you're including other options when you are taking your backups. But in this case, I'm just going to do a data files only backup. File name wise, whatever you want to call it. Now it will call it, it'll say, sorry, Sage Accounts by default, the first part of your file name. It'll then pick up your company name. So in my case, this one's called Demo VAT Return. And then it's going to have your date in there in reverse order. So it is the 25th of November today. And then it's going to have the time when you access the wizard. Now you can change that if you want to, call it whatever you want. You can choose your location as well. Obviously, default to wherever you last backed up to. So in my case, it was the desktop. Otherwise, just click browse and choose where you want to save that to. So I'll just accept those defaults. I'll just OK that. It does ask me, would you like to check your data before you back up? Now I'm going to click yes. I know I've got some warnings on here. I did have, but I'll just let it run through. It's really errors that you're on the lookout for. So no errors, I've got no comments. If you do have things such as warnings, I've got 5 in this set of data, just so you can see what they look like. And it tells you what they are. So this is the style of, essentially the style of warning, or the type of warning that I've got. Now you can expand that and see what it says. And if you need to, you've got the help option. And you can click it and go away and search for your error, your warning, or your comment and see what it relates to. Now it's just goods received notes in this case, so something that the kind of error that potentially you could only ever get if you're on the if you're using the purchase orders module in Professional. But again, if you ever get an error warning or comment, just click your help option and then you can search for that, find out what it is and what you need to do about that to resolve it. But I'm just gonna click close. It'll then whiz through the backup really quick on mine because it's a tiny set of data I'm using. It's just on my laptop as well. Tells me the backup has been successful. I click OK and I'll just return back to the VAT Return wizard. Next, it's a case of specifying your date range. Now it will default to sort of the next month from when you last ran a VAT return. So on mine, if I just drag this out the way, you can see the last one ran up to the end of December 2023. As I mentioned, it's an older set of data, this one. So it's picked up January 2024, tries to run it to in this case, it's running it to the previous month. So I don't want to run it for 22 months. I'm going to run mine for 3 months. So obviously it's most common to run it quarterly. So I'm doing January 2024 to March 2024. Now it confirms the date range for me. There is the option to use a custom date range, if anyone still prefers going down that method, where you can specify the dates. The idea of switching to just whole months is that we used to get loads of customers contact our support team back in the day, and they would say, oh, I've run it to the 30th of the month rather than the 31st. Or maybe you were running up to end of February, and it just so happens it was a leap year. So you'd be running up to the 28th rather than the 29th. So that type of thing. So using whole months, so having it this style just means that you're not going to get caught out by that. But it confirms the date range anyway. I can see it's running up for 3 months. Now this option here, include reconcile transactions. Generally, you'll never touch that option. What you're looking for when you're running your VAT return, the transactions that fall within your VAT quarter will not be reconciled. They won't have been included on a VAT return yet. So you don't need to tick this box. If there are late entries, which you'll want it to pick up, but those late entries are going to be prior to the period, they're not going to be reconciled because they're a late entry. They weren't entered in time to be picked up on a previous VAT return. So again, they would be picked up automatically. So we don't need to select this checkbox. This checkbox would be used where maybe you've reconciled an error. So let's say you are 2 months into your VAT quarter and you think, right, I'll run a VAT return and you accidentally reconcile it. You flag those transactions and then you don't restore. So you don't undo what you've just done. You've got 2 months which are flagged as being reconciled. So you get to the end of your quarter, you've got 1 month that isn't reconciled and 2 months that are. Now, when you run a VAT return, by not ticking this, it then wouldn't pick up those sort of first 2 months because they're flagged. So you would only really ever tick this really if you've made some sort of mistake. You've reconciled an error, or maybe you need to look at an old VAT return and it's not on your list in the background on the VAT ledger. So you don't need to tick it. So I'm sure some of you will have been running the VAT return and ticking this box every single time. It will actually make no difference if you've been running your VAT return that way. So don't worry about that. But generally, you don't need to tick it. So just specify your date range for your VAT period. Next, we come on to the VAT verification area. Now, you're either going to have 7 or 8 checks available to you. Now, I'll explain the one that's different or the one that might be missing from yours. Now, all of the checks, the 7 or 8, depending on the level of the software you're on, will be ticked by default. And it'll bring up this window. Now, I'm just going to quickly pop back to the slides just so we can see the difference between a UK return and an Irish VAT return with regard to the settings. It's pretty much the same. It's the same settings that you've got. The only thing that's going to be any different is when you come down to sort of the other potential issues where it mentions the VAT rates and the VAT range. Obviously, it'll be adjusted depending on your region. But the settings themselves, the checks that it makes, they're exactly the same. So again, although I'm using a UK return for the purpose of the demo, the settings are the same. So I'm just going to quickly run through these ones here, these 8, and I'll mention the one that's different. So the first one it mentions there, identify possible duplicate transactions. Now, there's various settings in Sage which will try and identify that at the point of entry. So if you're entering a batch invoice or batch credit, for instance, there are settings that it may say, well, are you sure you may have done this one already? So it will look for that, rather than you maybe discover that after you've done your VAT return, you've submitted it. So the idea of these verification settings, it's trying to identify things before you get to that point where you think, right, I've done my VAT return, I've submitted it, but actually I've spotted a mistake. Now what do I do? Much better to find any processing errors before you get to that point. I would recommend you leave them all ticked as well. You might get to a point where you think, well, actually, I'm not bothered about that one now. We've got a missing entries section. So you're either going to have 2 or 3 checks in here. This is where you've got the difference. The first one everyone will have, identify invoices or credits which have not been updated. So have you entered an invoice or a credit note within the invoices and credits ledger that actually hasn't been updated to the ledger? If it isn't updated, it wouldn't be included on your VAT return. Or is the one you've entered, you just forgot, you've missed it. So it'll try and identify that for you. Similarly, this next one, and this is where the difference occurs. You'll only have this check if you are on the professional level of the software. If you're on Essentials or Standard, you won't have it available for you, do you? Because it relates to the purchase orders ledger. And it's for those of you that are using Professional, this one is, it will identify any purchase orders which have been delivered but not invoiced. Now, there's a 50-50 split for those of you that use purchase orders on Professional. Some of you will use the update ledgers option within purchase orders, and some of you won't. I would say that's a good 50-50 split, that one as well. Half of you will, half of you won't. So when you flag a purchase order as being delivered, so it books the stock in, you've then got an option to the update ledgers option. Now, some people will use that to essentially post the details of the invoice across to the supplier's account. Others will just go directly into the supplier's ledger and enter a batch invoice. Now, if you go via batch invoice, this check will identify every single purchase order that's ever been flagged as being delivered. But if you are using update ledgers, I would leave this one ticked. It's a bit similar to invoices and credits. So it's almost like completed, but you haven't updated it to the supplier's account. Third check within here is to identify transactions with a VAT value where the tax code is not included on the VAT return. So have you specified a tax code against a transaction which isn't ticked to be picked up on the VAT return? So let's say rather than T1, you've actually typed in T11. By default, T11 wouldn't be included on the VAT return. So have you just made an error when you've selected that tax code? So again, it'll try and identify that for you. Coming on to the other potential issues section, the first one, and this is where it varies depending what region you're based in. So in the UK, it's going to look at VAT values on transactions for possible errors. So this is the default range. You can change it if you want to, but this is the default. So is the VAT value somewhere between 18 and 21% of the net value? If it's outside of that scope, then potentially it will identify it as a potential query for you. It may be a valid one, it may not be, but it's got to try and identify it and say, right, well, maybe you should check this. So in the UK, it's 18 to 21%, and if you're based in Ireland, those rates will be 21 to 24% by default. Again, you can change them if required. The next one will identify sales and purchase transactions not using your most common tax code. Now, most businesses, let's face it, it's not all just going to be standard rate of VAT. So whichever is your most commonly used tax code, it will by default be set to T1. So if you've got transactions that use something other than T1, this check will actually highlight that for you. Now, potentially you may have loads of T0 transactions like zero rated, exempt transactions. So where you've used the tax code other than T1, it will identify that as a potential query. So this one is a one that you might think, well, actually, it just unnerves me when it finds all of these. So actually, I'll just switch that one off. But it will be switched on by default. The third one in this section is to identify journals where the tax code is not selected as non-VATable. That's a bit of a double negative, that one. So what this one relates to is journal entries that don't use the non-VATable tax code. Now, the non-VATable tax code is T9. So when you enter a transaction with T9, it means it will not be picked up on the VAT return. So have you entered any journals that don't use T9? Yes, there are valid reasons and certain transactions where you will use something other than T9, but the vast majority of your journals in Sage accounts will be T9. And that's all it's doing. It's identifying the ones where you haven't used T9. So should it be something other than T9 or not? And then the final one, not really applicable in the UK anymore, is to identify possible incorrect EC transactions. So that's really just for Ireland, that one. Really, what it's looking for in this occasion is it'll look for where you've used a tax code which is a EC tax code, so trading outside of your own country but within the EC, where you don't have the right information entered within the likes of your customer or supplier record. So again, it will try and identify that for you. Again, for all of these checks, you'll find more information via the help option, or remember, you can just press F1 at any time. So I'm going to leave them all ticked. They will be all ticked by default. Doesn't matter whether you're UK or based in Ireland, they'll all be ticked. So you can pick and choose which ones you want to leave ticked. So just okay that. So far, we've taken it back up, we specified our date range, and we've run through the VAT verification settings. So ordinarily, this would take you, about a minute to complete this, depending on the time it takes to complete your backup. So we're ready to click Calculate VAT Return. So I'll give it a click. Really quick on mine because it's a tiny set of data. Now, you might get a message pop up at this stage. You might get a warning like this the earlier unreconciled transactions window. You might just get a warning that says so many transactions have been found for the VAT return, and you just get an OK button. But when you calculate that VAT return, what the software is going to look for, it's going to obviously look for it's going to take into account your VAT scheme. It's going to take into account your date range you've specified. And it's going to look for any VATable transactions under your VAT scheme that fall within the date range that you specified and haven't yet been included on a VAT return. So what we would term unreconciled transactions. But it will also look for any late entries. So it's going to look for any VATable transactions that are prior to your current VAT period. So these are going to likelihood is they're just late entries. So transactions which are classed as being VATable under your VAT scheme, but weren't entered in time to be included in your previous return. So it picks them up this time round. So it's in my case, it's found two. So it finds a bank payment. If we look along, it's fuel payment. And also it's found a purchase invoice. So presumably just hadn't been entered at the time. So we've entered it, we've backdated it, it picks it up on the next return. Now, if we want to, we can print the screen, we can send it to Excel. We get include and ignore options at the bottom. Now, it does look like I can highlight a transaction. And I've got the include or ignore. Now, it is all or nothing at this stage. I can't just say, right, I want to include this one, but I want to ignore that one. It's all or nothing. So I either include both of them or all of them that are listed, or I ignore them. Now, generally speaking, if they're just late entries, you're going to include them. You need to. If you need to, you can obviously print, send it to Excel. You could close out of the VAT return and go in, if necessary, correct those transactions. But I'm going to include them. And when I do that, it takes me on to step 2 of the VAT return. Now you'll see at this point, I've got my VAT return on the right there, and it's basically lists the figures that have been calculated. Now, if I just quickly pop back to the slides for a moment, find the right option, there we go. So popping back to the slides, we can see the difference between step 2 on the UK return and step 2 of the Irish return. You'll see the options down the left, they're exactly the same. Now you'll see there on the Irish one, it's found nothing in the verification results, so that option is grayed out. But if it does find something, you will find that the view results option is active when you come to step 2. But other than the VAT return itself and the appearance of it, and obviously the way it calculates, everything else is the same. You've got the same options on the screen. So let's head back to my desktop and we'll continue on. Right, so on this one, we found 4 potential queries. So those verification settings that we left ticked. I'll click the results, see what it is. So this is telling me, so the ones that are ticked, it means it's found nothing untoward for that particular verification check. The ones that have the amber triangle are the ones where it's found something. So if we just pick on this one as an example, I mentioned this one earlier. I've got some transactions that don't use my most commonly used tax code. So mine was set to T1. If I click view, it'll give me a list of them. So in this case, I've got some transactions here. I've got an SI, which it uses T2, and I've got a purchase invoice, and it's using T5. So Not uncommon, those types of transactions. So do I want it again? I can print this list, I can send it to Excel. I might want to close out, and if necessary, I can make whatever changes. Then I come into the VAT return and proceed through to the current point I'm at. So click when you get any view options, click through them. Ideally, you want to resolve any issues if necessary. So obviously this one, nothing untoward there. It's identifying it, but I'm quite happy that those have been entered correctly. Got some others as well, just for the purpose of the demo. So once you've worked through those, I'm on to sort of checking the figures and printing or generating reports as well. Right, now you can see on the UK VAT return here, we've got the figures that are being calculated, and as you probably expect, our support team regularly gets inundated with questions about the VAT return. So every month, depending when your quarter is, sort of leading up to the submission point, we'll get loads of questions. Right, I've run the VAT return, my figures don't look right, what should I do? Now the easiest thing is when you're at this stage, you're looking at the VAT return, the common questions are going to right, well, which box looks wrong? What's the figure you've got there? What looks wrong about it? Is it too high, too low? Or maybe you just want a better understanding about how that calculates. So the first option is to use your drill down. So we just pick on box 1, for instance. So each of these boxes where there's a value where you've got this sort of icon attached to it, it means you can drill down on it. So if we just pick on box 1 as an example, if I click on that, it gives me a breakdown of that figure in box 1. So for my VAT scheme, it gives me a table based on the transaction types that are picked up on my VAT return, and also the tax codes that should be included in that particular box of the VAT return. And it gives me a breakdown of the relevant values. Now, sometimes that's enough, just seeing that when we say, right, well, why don't you click it? You'll get this table, and it might be enough to jog your memory. You might see something in the receipts column or sales credits column, or maybe a journals column. You think, oh, right, yeah, I forgot about that. But you might just be looking and think, well, actually, where does that figure come from? How's it calculated? So sales invoices at T1, if I highlight that and then double click it, give it a moment, it will load the transactions. So these are the transactions that make up that value. So this value here, sales invoices at T1, £14,310. This is the breakdown. So it gives me a list of the transactions. Again, I can print this list, I can send it to Excel. So it's giving me a list of all of those transactions that contribute to that value. Someone on our tech support team, or even myself, I couldn't sit here and say, oh, that transaction is right or wrong. Only you can do that. It's not going to say, right, this transaction here, that's wrong. Only you will know that by working back through it, if necessary. Now you can do that for any of the boxes. So if you had a value in receipts at T1, again, we can highlight it, double click it. Obviously it doesn't find anything, there's no value in this instance. But again, it would give you that breakdown. So you can get that sort of top level view. I'll do it for box 6 as well, just so we can see another angle of it. So again, breaks it down, transaction type by tax code. And I might think, well, oh, there it is there, receipts at T2. Highlight it, double click it. It's this transaction or transactions that make up that value. So it's a nice, easy way to learn more about your VAT return, just clicking on the relevant values, giving you an idea, right, well, on my VAT return for my VAT scheme, these are the transactions types that get picked up in a certain box on your return, and also these are the tax codes that affect that box as well. So that's one way of analysing your figures. The other is to use your reports. Now you've got a reconciliation reports folder, or option I should say. When you click that, it'll bring up this window. If you expand reconciliation reports, it will then list not only transaction analysis, but it should have a folder for your particular VAT scheme. So in my case, I'm set up for the standard VAT scheme. And the idea of this is the subfolders within it. So if I expand standard VAT, click onto bank, it will then give me a list of the reports that, if I was going to generate loads of reports before running my VAT return, these are the types of reports I'd run. So it just saves me dotting around before coming to the VAT return in the customer's ledger, the nominals ledger, suppliers, bank. It just means they're all grouped into one place. Now, how many reports you generate, if any, is entirely up to you. The other option you've got here is to print the VAT return. Now, when you click this option, again, it'll give you a series of reports. I'm just going to select all the ones that are available, just so you can see, give you an idea of what is there. If there are any that are sort of grayed out, it'll be because there's nothing applicable. So adjustments, I'll come back to the adjustments option in a moment, but at the moment I haven't made any adjustments, so that one's not available to me. It's grayed out. If I did post an adjustment, that would be active. Just going to quickly tick them. I'll just preview them all. Again, really quick on mine to generate these. So I'll just accept all that criteria that comes up. And then we'll quickly have a quick look. We'll quickly have a look at the reports on what's there. Right, so let me drag them around a bit so we can find the one we're after. So the first tick box was the VAT return itself. So this is the report that generates. Gives you an idea, obviously it lists that period that you've run, what options you selected. And also gives you a breakdown of transaction numbers. So in my case, it was 49 transactions included in total. 47 of transactions were within the date range and unreconciled, and 2 were prior to the date range but were unreconciled. So those 2 late entries that I chose to include. I've got boxes 1 to 9 shown on this one. It's a UK return, and it shows me a copy of the figures that would be essentially be submitted. Good one to have a copy of if you need it. It's sort of your top level report. Let's close out of that one. The second one is the summary report. Now again, this is a multi-page report, this one. So when I clicked on the figure in box 1, it gave me that table. So you'll have a page for each of those boxes that potentially you could click down on to show you that initial table. It gives you that breakdown. So this one is basically where I've clicked on box 1. Now I've got that table. If I scroll down, you would have the other boxes that you can drill down as well. So for UK, you'd have one for box 1, box 2, box 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9 potentially. So we've got a 7-page report. The third option was the detailed reports. Now this is the one that's really good to report to have if ever you have a VAT inspection. If you were looking at your VAT return and the inspector's saying, right, well, you've declared this figure on your VAT return, where does that figure come from? This is the one that essentially proves your figures. Where did they come from? It gives you a list of all the transactions. Now it breaks it down, groups it by, so in this case, it's VAT box 1. And in this case, it's saying, right, sales invoices at T1, here's your list. So imagine that table that first came up. Anywhere there was a value, if I double clicked on it, it would have given me a list of transactions. So it's doing that for each of the potentially the options. It's showing me that group of them. Now the adjustments one was grayed out, but if we go for the next one, This is the earlier unreconciled transaction. So it basically gives me a separate report based on those two transactions that I included, and it will give me a breakdown of, right, which boxes did they impact on. So in this case, I can see in box 4, the VAT element of that purchase invoice. And then in box 4, I've got the VAT element of the bank payment for the fuel. So that's been included in there as well. And then the net values in this case included in box 7. So you've got that separate breakdown should you need it. Final report was the departmental report. So essentially it gives you the same as the detailed report, but breaks it down by department. So you've got an extra grouping on there. But essentially it gives you the same information. Now for each of those reports, you can obviously print them. Quite common to print them. You don't need to. You could output them, save them as a PDF. But when you generate your VAT return, when we reconcile in just a moment, it will actually save a copy of those. It'll archive a copy of your VAT return. Now, I just want to quickly cover this bit, this make adjustments area. Now, chances are you'll never need to use this for the vast majority of you. It would be used commonly, maybe if you'd made a mistake and HMRC said, right, well, you need to correct these figures. It might be you've been instructed by, let's say, your accountants, or it might be for your specific VAT scheme, such as partial exemption, that you need to do some form of calculation and then make an adjustment to your figures. Now, if you do need to make an adjustment, it makes it really simple. You just click Make Adjustment. It will list the VAT return figures that have been calculated in the background. So you see these ones. And if you needed to make an adjustment, so let's say for whatever reason I needed to make an adjustment to the figure in box 1, I will click in the adjustment column, pop in a reason, and then you can pop a positive or a negative adjustment in there. I can tab down and I can do multiple adjustments as well if necessary. So you might do that, as I say, commonly if you're on a partial exemptions VAT scheme. Now, if you wanted that adjustment was correct, I would just save it and it would update the adjustment column. And then the reported figure, when I click close, you'll see this adjusts. I'm going to take that adjustment back out though. So I'll just click on it, press F8 to discard the line, save it. It's back to 0, click close, and it's back to what it was. If you are using partial exemption as well, there are probably certain calculations that you will do normally on Excel. If you want, you can add attachments to your VAT return. So you just click, browse, and maybe save copies of those documents along with your VAT return itself. You can add those in later on as well if required. Now let's say you've checked your figures in, you're quite happy with them as best you can. You think, why, well, I'm going to agree the figures at this point. So I've seen the VAT return, figures, I've checked them best I can, and I'm ready to reconcile. So I want to agree those figures. So you click Reconcile VAT Return. You're prompted, flag transactions as VAT reconciled. Now this is the point I mentioned earlier. Make sure you've taken that back up in step 1. So it says you cannot reverse the VAT reconciliation process. So make sure you've taken that back up. If you haven't, don't continue. Get all the way back to step 1, take that back up, then get back to this point. But let's say we do agree, we're quite happy with that. Yes, we want to flag our transactions. The idea of flagging the transactions is that when we come to do our next return, it'll ignore any transactions that have been flagged. So the 49 transactions that we've included this time will essentially be flagged. So they're ticked to say, right, you've accounted for the VAT on this transaction. So it doesn't get picked up on a future VAT return. You don't want to be double counting VAT. So I'm going to click yes. I get a little progress bar there. Now, obviously, yours may take a little bit longer, depends how many transactions you have that need to be flagged. And that essentially takes me on to step 3. Now, step 3, which is what we're going to be covering on Thursday's webinar at 11. So part 2 of the VAT return, essentially. I'll just quickly go back to the slides for a moment. And you can see when you get to step 3, again, the VAT return on the left, it's different depending which region you're based in. But other than that, the rest of the options are the same. So you've got the VAT transfer, the submission option. Processes are a little bit different depending where you are, which region. But again, we'll be going through that on Thursday, and then the option to record your payment and add attachments. Now, just quickly go back to my screen for a moment before we quickly before we wrap up the webinar. So what's happened when we've reconciled? So we got our VAT return there. These are the figures that we had on the previous screen, so they've now been agreed. What else has happened is it's saved that VAT return. It's now on that list. Now I might think, well, I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll come back to complete the VAT return later on. But that VAT return is now reconciled. Those transactions that were included, they've been flagged. And if and when I'm ready, or maybe I need to view that VAT return, I can highlight it, double click it, and it takes me back into that point. Now from here, I can still drill down on my figures. Still get at that information if needed. We can still print our reports. So those reports we had access to earlier, this is what I mean by you don't necessarily need to print them. People still do, but you don't necessarily need to. You could just export them, save them as save it on a file, or if and when you need them, as long as you've got your VAT return on the list, you can just go into the VAT return and regenerate them. So if you did have a VAT inspection, but need that detailed report, I can get at that information still. I've got the verification results if I needed to view those again. I can view any adjustments that were put through. I can still add attachments if needed. So if I forgot to do that on step 2, I can always go back, click add attachments, and sort of, again, if I'm on the partial exemption where I've done various calculations, I might think, well, actually, I want to attach that to the VAT return in the background just for future reference should I need it. But other than that, that's your VAT return reconciled at that point. The rest, these tasks down the side, as I say, that's what we're going to be covering in part 2. So that's what we'll be covering in Thursday's session, if you'd like to come along to that one. Now, if you've got any final questions, I think we're just about on top of the questions at the moment. If you've got any final questions, I'll pop them in there and we'll try and pick them up. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, what we'll try and do is come back to you with an answer at some point this afternoon. Sometimes we get more complicated questions. As you're probably aware, VAT can be quite a complicated topic. It's a big topic, quite a big government department assigned to the world of VAT, and I don't think everyone professes to know everything about VAT. So if we're not sure about something, you don't get an answer to your question, we'll just drop you an email later today. If you've got any those final questions or that immediately spring to mind, get them entered and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Remember the copy of the slides, if you want those, that are available to download while you're on the session. The session has been recorded. A link to the recording will be included on your follow-up email. Now, there is loads of great supporting information available from our help centre. Again, if you've downloaded the slides, these links will work for you. Otherwise, head along to sage.co.uk/help. Obviously, it splits it by region as well. Webinars wise, loads of webinars available. From next week, we will start our next digital badge series. So we're going to be looking at corrections. And one of them does relate directly to VAT as well. So we'll be looking at, one of the sessions is dedicated to looking at the difference when you make a correction when a transaction is VAT reconciled and not, and the impact that that has on your return. So do get yourself signed up, have a good look through that webinar page. Our timetable currently covers this week and also the sessions that we're running throughout December. So do take a chance to look at that and get signed up if you have, if you want to attend. Now I'll come back to, there's a couple of questions just come through there, so I'll try and pick those up in just a moment. But for those of you about to leave, I don't want to keep you any longer than I need to. Many thanks for coming along. I hope you have enjoyed it. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident. Some of you will have run the VAT returns many, many times, and you think, well, I knew all of that. Maybe you know a bit more. Great. Hopefully you've gone away with a little bit of reassurance today, a little bit of pat on the back, thinking, yeah, your knowledge is up to date. Others, you might be a little bit more not as confident. Maybe you've never run a VAT return before. If you've never run one before, hopefully you are feeling a bit more confident now. Right, okay. So, sorry, it looks like it's been a potential mix-up with the VAT return, the handouts. Let me just double check that. Let's see if I can have a quick look at it. See, it's part one. But I'll just quickly check it. See what it comes up with. It is, but they are part one. It will mention part two at the bottom. I'll just check the other one as well, just make sure I've got the right one on there. Yeah, they're both, those handouts are for part one. It does mention part two in the reminder on page one, but they are for the cover part one. So yeah, the right handouts are there. Right, so hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident wherever you sit within that sort of spectrum of knowledge and experience of running the VAT returns. There will be an opportunity to complete a little survey as you leave. If you can take a minute to do that, really appreciate it if you can. We love reading those comments, how we hit the mark or not. Let us know what we could do to improve the webinars, topics you'd like to see covered going forwards. Those are all very welcome comments if you've got any thoughts and ideas that you don't mind sharing with us. Remember, VAT Return Part 2, so completing that sort of third tab of the VAT Return Wizard. We are running that webinar on Thursday at 11, so hopefully we'll see you on that one. A couple of questions did come through, so I'll quickly come back to those. First one from Eve, at the point of verification, how do I make changes before submitting? So let me just quickly share my screen. And I'm going to quickly restore my backup just so I can demonstrate this one. So remember that one from earlier. I chose the backup option there, didn't I? I'm going to restore. File restore helps if you choose the right option. So we'll browse for it. It's on my desktop, the one we took earlier. It's that one. Just going to quickly restore it. Quickly let it run through. It's going to prompt me to sign in then. Right, okay, so if I went to the VAT return, so I'm back to where I was at the very beginning. I'll quickly specify we run it up to March of 2024. So all the verification settings are switched on. We calculate the VAT return. I'll include those as we did earlier. So the verification results, the question was at the point of verification, how can I make the change before submitting? So if you've got verification or anything's been identified, so let's say this one, it says one invoice or credit which has not been updated. I can view it and I can see, right, it's invoice 84. For whatever reason, I forgot to update that one for the ledgers. So if I need to do that, what I need to do is actually close out of my VAT return. Let me just close out. Then I would go into invoices and credits, find number 84, that one there, and just update it to the ledgers. And then once I'm done, I can then go back to the VAT return again. So just a case of you closing out, make whatever changes you need, which is the ideal of either printing that list if it does find anything or sending it to Excel. Sometimes you might get a few of them listed. So there might be a few changes you need to make. So close out the VAT return, make your changes, go back into the VAT return. Again, I would always encourage you when you're going back in, take that back up. Remember at that point, your data's changed. So take that back up and then continue through the VAT return again. Another question from Alison as well. If you have more than late invoices, your VAT, let's have a quick look at that. So, Alison, your question there. What have you got more than sort of, I suppose, one late entry to include? It's should those late entries be included or not? It's all or nothing when it comes to late entries. You can't choose to include some and not others. You can't pick and choose from that list. It's all or nothing. So if they are correct, those entries, whatever they're for, journal reversals or otherwise, do you need to include them or not? Only you can decide that. If you need a little bit of advice on it, maybe speak to our support team, but otherwise, maybe speak to your accountant about that one. So I can't just sit here and say, right, you should definitely include that, you should definitely not include that. If you need a bit of advice at the time, just get in touch. Right, I think the questions are drying up. So anything that is outstanding that we maybe need to look into a little bit, we'll get back to you about that one. We'll drop you an email later on this afternoon. But for now, brings us to the end of the session. Do take that minute to complete the survey. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you're feeling a lot more confident. Remember, there's loads of supporting information if you need it. And I hope to see, hopefully I'll see you on Thursday's session at 11. Many thanks.